Okay, so I'm going to start out and talk a little bit about how we communicated ideas before the internet. So one of the fundamental themes in the textbook and in the class that we're going to be discussing is the idea of a network and how a network can act as a medium to communicate different types of ideas. And, if you think about it, social networks are kind of the way that we do those things now. But how did ideas get communicated before the internet? So I'm going to take you back to the before times, and apologies for reminiscing down memory lane, but hopefully it'll help us establish how these things happened before that. So we can start out with a variety of different ways for communicating before the internet, and a lot of them were distinguished by the amount of time that it took to communicate the ideas. Prior to the internet, there were a lot fewer sources of information that were available to us, yet they tended to be more vetted. You had things like peer review, or there were barriers for cost to publish or to broadcast. And those could have been cost barriers, or they could have been legislative barriers that prohibited people from broadcasting. So there were barriers in place, but that meant that the information tended to be a lot more vetted than it is now. So we can start first with a discussion of some of the earliest means of communication, which were scrolls and illuminated manuscripts. And these kind of lasted from antiquity to about 1440, and we'll see why 1440 was a kind of important cutoff date. But scrolls were rolls of papyrus, parchment, or paper containing writing. Illuminated manuscripts, these were handwritten texts, and these were typically copied by scribes with illustrations in the margin or on the entire page, and were a way that we communicated the written word during the medieval era. And pictured here is the Book of Kells, which had the four Gospels. This book dates back to around 800 AD, and it's still housed in Trinity College in Dublin, and it's one of the things that I actually had to see when I was in Dublin. There's a fictional movie called The Secret of Kells that deals with this particular illuminated manuscript, and there's actually a kind of cool Twitter account that also looks at things that were put in the margins of the illuminated manuscripts by monks. So, it's still around in a way today, this form of communication. Going from there, we also have philosophical and scientific letters, and these were used to communicate ideas between collaborators across distances, and they were usually sent around along trade routes such as the Silk Road. In Gal Beckerman's book, The Quiet Before, which I reference a little later on in this module, he talks about Nicholas Claude Fabry de Pierre's measurement of the longitude of the Mediterranean Sea, and the Society of Letters that he was a part of, and how he used the letters to communicate with collaborators all around the Mediterranean Sea to calculate the longitude of the Mediterranean Sea, which was a problem that had eluded us for many centuries. We could get the latitude, but we couldn't get the longitude, the length that it meant to travel from the west to the east on the Mediterranean Sea. And communicating with collaborators around the Mediterranean via letter, Pierce was able to solve this problem through measurements taken during an eclipse. So fascinating story. And again, I highly recommend Beckerman's book for some of the details that it goes into as to how we communicated prior to the internet and even after the internet. 1440, again, I mentioned that as a cutoff date because that was when the printing press was invented by Gutenberg. And we went from about 40 pages a day, either from rubbings or hand copies, to producing 3,600 printed pages per day using the printing press. And this resulted in the democratization of knowledge. And, some people even argued that, hey, because this goes so quickly, these ideas might not be as vetted as previous ideas. Things that made it into books with the printing press, it was argued they might not be as valid as things that were handwritten. But the printing press revolutionized things and allowed for sharing of scientific and trade manuals, and resulted in the growth of cities as well. Newspapers and magazines, these can actually be traced back to government news bulletins published in China around the year 700. Mass-produced versions obviously took off after the invention of the printing press, and they're distinguished from other printed materials such as books because they're being published on a regular basis, like a daily newspaper or a monthly magazine. Now, obviously, with newspapers and magazines, some have more authority than others. For example, the New York Times has generally a high degree of authority compared with a newspaper such as the Toronto Sun that's pictured here that in some ways lacks nuance, shall we say. Radio is another medium through which we communicated ideas, and radio was first identified, the waves themselves were first identified in the late 1800s by Hertz, and Marconi invented the first transmitter around 1895 or 1896. Commercial broadcast began around 1900, and radio changed the immediacy of the communication. Communication took place immediately over the radio. Now, there were lots of government regulations that resulted in some rebellions, such as pirate radio in the UK and free radio in the United States. And I mentioned Spirit of Radio by Russia, which gives a really, it's a wonderful animated video, and it gives a great and concise history of this medium. And if you like radio, check out the Radio Garden app. It's free on my iPhone. It allows you to listen to radio stations around the world, and you can navigate the little globe and pick out where you want to listen to. So, if you're missing the radio station from home, or, you want to check out what's being broadcast in some remote corner of the South Pacific, you can tune in and listen to the radio station in that area. In fact, we sometimes listen to what's going on in Jakarta just to see what's going on there, or sometimes I'll pull back and listen to things that are being broadcast out of Toronto or London or Detroit because I want to know what's going on back in that area. So it's kind of neat. We still have radio, and it's still a valid medium. Of course, it's in some ways been supplanted by modern tools that we can find on the internet, but there's still a cool thing about radio. And I'll go into a little sidebar. This wasn't a very major way of communicating information, but it's a little bit of a sidebar on radio. Certain bands, most prominently the Grateful Dead, but certainly also Metallica, allowed their fans to tape their concerts and to trade the tapes for free. And that's actually how both bands really got their start. And allowed Metallica to really take off as a band, and certainly the Grateful Dead. And the Grateful Dead have even made all 16,218 live shows that they recorded from 1965 to 1995 free on the Internet Archive. So you can go to the Internet Archive library, and there's an entire section devoted to Grateful Dead shows. And so you no longer have to trade the tapes, but people have made them available out there. And I think that's really cool. They really kind of switched the model on which the music industry operated. And of course, television invented in 1927, and the first stations began broadcasting around 1928. It had the immediacy of radio coupled with the pictures, but there were similar drawbacks to radio. There were startup costs associated with it, and obviously access. There were some public access shows, but certainly not to the extent that people have public access on YouTube to broadcast whatever we like. And that brings us to today, where we can communicate our ideas instantly and nearly free of cost. There's email, websites for developing ideas or collections of ideas, instant messaging, social media sites, video sharing sites, streaming sites, such as Twitch, where we can, stream things live, our video game experiences, etc. And, we have the reproducibility of the printed manuscript, or the ability to save broadcasts that, might not have existed on television or radio at all times, while still preserving that immediacy. But something got lost along the way, and I'll leave you to ponder what was lost along the way. And that will wrap it up. Thanks so much for watching.